Imagine the show Succession, but everyone is Russian, religious, confused, in desperate need of therapy, and all underpinned and predicated by theology and nihilism. Well, that's in brief Dostoevsky's famous work in the golden age of Russian literature called The Brothers Karamazov, published around about 1879 1880, right at the tail end of his career. Now, this is set in provincial Russia in the 1960s, after the great reforms of Tsar Alexander II, where serfs have been emancipated, everyone is arguing about God, and young intellectuals are convinced they can rebuild society with pamphlets and very long sentences. Dostoevsky drops a messy little family right into that moment and lets them act out Russia's crisis of faith, reason, and responsibility. Remember, Alexander II emancipated the serfs, but the thing we learn is you can free the serfs, but you can always serve the free. Here's the Karamazov family. Right at the rotten centre is Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov. He's a lecherous, drunken landowner who treats fatherhood as an unfortunate side effect of lust. He has three legitimate sons: Dmitri, who's a passionate sensualist; Ivan, the rationalist intellectual; and Alyosha, who's a novice monk, who's annoyingly decent in a world that does not deserve him. Then there's also Smerdyakov, the probable illegitimate son, a sullen servant who listens more than he speaks, always a bad sign in Russian novels. Remember, being quiet in Russia is dreadful. The book opens quite modestly with a family meeting that goes about as well as a Christmas dinner when somebody has invited both ex-wives and forgotten to hide the knives. Dmitri and Fyodor are locked in a sordid dispute over money and the affections of the same woman, Grushenka, while Ivan looks on with cold detachment, and Alyosha clings to his spiritual mentor, Elder Zosima, like a moral support animal in a cassock. One of the famous lines comes from Zosima: "Above all, do not lie to yourself." It's a novel in miniature. Every Karamazov is lying to himself about who he is, what he wants, and what he is capable of. Well, before we get to the murder, there's a story of faith, doubt, and rebellion. There is, of course, a murder. Dostoevsky pauses for a very long philosophical warm-up. Ivan, the clever brother, is the voice of Western-style rationalism and doubts that the swept Russian educated society, after the emancipation and the spread of European ideas, are going nowhere. Right? Now, understand this, that the French Revolution, the writings of Voltaire and Rousseau and everything, they've sort of had a long time to reach Russia. Russia's trying to industrialize, but it can't. It's trying to modernize, it can't. The elite are full of Western European ideas, but it's very difficult to implement them. So over wine, he unloads his famous rebellion against God, essentially saying, if the price of harmony is the suffering of innocent children, then the ticket can be returned. Alyosha listens, with the patience of a man who realizes that the debate will not end in time for dinner. Zosima offers the counter-vision. Paradise is hidden in each one of us. If I wish, it will come for me in reality, tomorrow even, and for the rest of my life. In other words, salvation is less about abstract theology and more about how you treat the person in front of you, something that the Karamazovs consistently fail at. Then comes the Grand Inquisitor. This is Ivan's prose poem told to Alyosha, in which Christ returns during the Spanish Inquisition, and he is, guess what, promptly arrested. The Inquisitor explains that people don't actually want freedom, they want miracle, mystery, and authority, preferably with good catering. We are not with you, but with him, the Inquisitor says to Christ, revealing that the Church, in his view, long ago chose power over truth. It's an almost blasphemous monologue, and Elisha answers it not with a counter-agreement, but with a kiss. Dostoevsky suggests that love is a better reply to doubt than a footnote. Here comes the murder of Fyodor Pavlovich. Let's get back to the family circus, shall we? Fyodor Pavlovich is now terrified that Dmitri will kill him in a jealous rage over Grushenka and a disputed 3,000 rubles. Everybody knows Dmitri has publicly threatened his father. Never an ideal move when your novel consists of murder investigations. Smerdyakov, meanwhile, remember he's the legitimate child, quietly tells Ivan that Dmitri is capable of patricide and encourages Ivan to go away on business, which Ivan obligingly does. On the night in question, Dmitri, in a frenzy of jealousy, runs about town, beats a man with a pestle, and throws money around like a drunken hedge fund manager. He then rushes into the inn at Mokroy to find Grushenka, convinced that this will be the last night together before he kills himself. It is, in fairness, a very intense evening, even for somebody as uber-intense as Dmitri. While Dmitri is elsewhere, Fyodor Pavlovich is murdered at home, his head smashed in and money stolen. Suspicion immediately falls on Dmitri, whose hands are literally bloody when he's arrested at Mokroy, shortly after declaring eternal love to Grushenka. Dmitri is many things: impulsive, violent, terrible with budgets, but we're not entirely sure he's a murderer, or is he? The quiet revelation is Smerdyakov, who later confesses to Ivan that he committed the murder, exploiting Dmitri's threats and Ivan's philosophical skepticism as moral cover. Ivan, who liked to think ideas were harmless, is devastated to discover his clever theories about mortality and morality without God may have given Smerdyakov permission to act. But it's fait accompli. Now comes the trial and the issue of guilt. The second half of the novel becomes a courtroom drama in which Dostoevsky treats as national entertainment and a moral circus everything that goes on. The prosecution paints Dmitri as a perfect villain, a sensualist, a spendthrift, a man who once nearly killed an old man for money and women, rushes on to "Can you believe this guy?" kind of television. The defense tries to present a more sympathetic view, but the fact and Dmitri's own behavior are terribly unhelpful. Ivan, now half mad from guilt, tries to confess Smerdyakov's role and his own moral complicity, but his testimony collapses into delirium. He's visited by a hallucinated devil, a sort of shabby, talkative gentleman who embodies Ivan's doubts and mocks his rationalism. It's like being heckled by your own worldview. Dmitri himself becomes almost Christ-like in suffering, declaring that he will accept his punishment, even for a crime he insists he did not commit. He dreams of expiating guilt, going to Siberia with Grushenka, and eventually returning to Russia spiritually renewed. Because nothing says moral regeneration like a long walk through the taiga, and sometimes through the tundra too. The jury, unconvinced by visions, devils and metaphysics, finds Dmitri guilty. In the background, Ivan has arranged money for a possible escape, hinting that the story of responsibility is not over, it's just been postponed. Elisha and the children are a different ending. It is not close with the adults, who are all psychologically exhausted, but with Aloysia and a group of schoolboys gathered at the funeral of Elucia, a sick child. It is a scene of almost unbearable sentiment, but also the clearest sentiment of the book's faith and ordinary kindness. Elosia urges the boy to remember the day and the love they felt for their friend, insisting that no good memory is ever lost. It is a small stubborn answer to a very big question that Ivan raised. Russia in the 1860s and 70s was lurching between reform and reaction, faith and radical politics, and terrorists and idealists plotting new worlds in basement flats. Dostoevsky's answer is not a political program, but rather an unfashionable idea that redemption begins with how you treat your neighbour, and possibly not by murdering your father over 3,000 rubles and a woman called Krushenka. So, to finish off, we've had patricide, a show trial, philosophical tools about God, a hallucinated devil, and a monk preaching radical tenderness. The Brothers Karamazov is, among other things, a murder mystery where the real puzzle is not who killed the old man, but who is ultimately responsible when an entire moral climate goes berserk. Zosima warns in the book, a man who lies to himself comes to a point where he does not discern any truth. Each Karamazov brother is lying to himself, in passion, in intellect, or in piety. And Russia in the background is doing much the same in its rush towards modernity. If you want to know whether a society can survive when faith collapses, reason sneers, and everybody still has a raging libido, Dostoevsky's answer is cautiously hopeful. But if only someone somewhere chooses to be an Aloysia rather than a Fyodor Pavlovich. Thank you very much. If you like it, do subscribe.